Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Mardiege, here on Wednesday, February 5th, here to talk some more on the Super Bowl a little bit with some of the things we got on today's schedule, looking at what Jalen Hurts had to say during this media week at the Super Bowl, obviously, down there in New Orleans. Jalen Hurts was asked about what is his motivation, going into this game. So we'll talk about that. And also with all the recent, news and conspiracies around the Kansas City Chiefs and the officials, we're going to bring it up on today's show, give our thoughts on it, but also get a little bit of what the NFL Referee Association had to say in response to all the criticism their officials are getting as well. So that and much more going on today's show, so make sure to stick around. But before we get started, I'd like to give you guys the opportunity, as always, to be a part of these live shows by any means of a question, a comment, or any opinion you'd like to share. Please don't hesitate to share your opinion or insights on anything you have to say. It's always well received, and we're always looking forward to getting your guys' perspective on anything we talk about during these live shows. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on today's show, there's an easy way to do that. Just use the Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. And we rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the Super Chat button, and get involved with the show. Again, click the $ at the bottom of the chat box, and just let us know what's on your mind, basically. So with that being said now, we can move on to the first topic here in relation to the Super Bowl as we get closer and closer to the big game. Jalen Hurts, played one of the most remarkable games in a Super Bowl 2 seasons ago when they ultimately lost to the Chiefs 38-35. But Hurts finished with a stat line of 27 of 38 for 304 yards and 1 passing touchdown and 3 rushing touchdowns on top of that. And the Eagles' 35 points that they put up in that game were the most in a Super Bowl loss, and Jalen Hurts joined Steve Young and Joe Montana as the only players in Super Bowl history to account for at least 370 yards and 4 touchdowns. And with those kind of numbers, that kind of grouping there with Steve Young and Joe Montana, you would have thought that the Eagles easily would have won that game, in dominant fashion, but they ran into, the Chiefs and what they've been for the last, 5 to 6 years. So that was last time, right? And now the Eagles have another opportunity at this thing, have another crack at the Kansas City Chiefs, and they're trying to do what the 49ers couldn't do when the 49ers faced off against the Chiefs last year actually, but they fell short in overtime, basically, right? So now the Eagles have an opportunity to right their wrong from last time. And on that last performance, on that last Super Bowl matchup between these two teams, Jalen Hurts is at the forefront of everything, right? Not just this playoffs with how much is being talked about him, but also going back to that last performance, right, where he played very well, but he also had the fumble that was returned for a touchdown, and he was basically asked this week how that has affected him and essentially what he's taken from that last Super Bowl performance. And this is what he had to say on that topic. Not this one, that's for later. This one on Jalen Hurts and what he had to say on last game. And he said, but ultimately, every game has its lessons, good, bad, or indifferent. So just being able to become wiser, grow, and mature and take all these lessons in for the next season and the next games. It's had a great driving force. It lit a fire in me. And to have this opportunity again is exactly what you work for. So, last time, if you go through the events of that game and how we can take from that and kind of give us a idea of what can happen in this game coming up. Last time the Eagles were up 24-14 at halftime, despite that mistake from Jalen Hurts, right? fumbling the ball and having it returned for a touchdown. They were still up by 10 points in that Super Bowl before, obviously, Kansas City came back in the second half, and, it was all about Jalen Hurts and the passing game mainly the last time around, right? You look at it, and no running back had more than 7 carries and 21 yards in that Super Bowl, right? That would be sacrilegious now for this Eagles team, right? To only have 7 carries maximum for one of your running backs, that being Saquon Barkley now for only 21 yards. Like, everybody would be fired there if that's what happened again, right? But back then, their identity, I think, was a little bit more split. Now they're very much run first, run heavy, right, with that offensive line. And Saquon Barkley, obviously. So it just goes to show you again that they're very capable of winning with the passing game because, in that last Super Bowl, they arguably could have won most of the Super Bowls. If they played against any other team of the past Super Bowls, they probably would have beaten most of them, I would dare to say. And, it's just the Chiefs, right? Just how they fell short. But I think they were able to do it, and they just showed their capabilities again of that passing game and how dominant it was, and putting up 35 points, right? I mean, that's the most in a Super Bowl loss. So to show those capabilities last time around, now we bring it back to this year in 2025 where they got another opportunity. A lot of the same faces, but a very different approach, I would say, this time around. And obviously you have Saquon, and last time they weren't as good in, I would even say that last time, other than Saquon, this time around, they're a lot better in man coverage, right? Their defensive backs are better. And I would even probably say their defensive line's better. This time around, it's younger, it's faster, I would say. Last time, you had Fletcher Cox, younger talent, I should say, with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Nolan Smith as well. I think those guys are the biggest, contributors to that now, which is why I feel like now they're in a lot better of a spot with those guys, or that position really rejuvenated with these Georgia guys. So that's also another difference we see this time around. And also, just taken from that Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes ran a lot in that game. He had a lot of plays outside the pocket, right? He had that big run at the end of the game that pretty much sealed the deal for them to just kick a field goal and ultimately win the game by 3 points. But this time with a younger defensive line, a lot more agile, faster, and things like that, I would say they have a better chance, right? That's where I was going when I brought up the defensive line before. So all of that is obviously some of the biggest differences, right? But as for Hurts, to answer the question, does Jalen Hurts need a big game like the last time, like the last Super Bowl? I mean, I don't think he needs like a whole entire 60 minutes, almost like he had last time, where he threw for over 300 and he accounted for 4 touchdowns. I don't think he needs to have the length of a great game, so to say. But I think this time around, it's just more so about picking your spots, right? It's more so about taking advantage of those big, gotta have it moments, right? I think he needs to win most of those if he's going to have a chance for him and the Eagles to win this time around, right? Because they're not the same team. They have the same players mostly, but the identity is very different, right? When you have a generational talent like Saquon, you're going to have to really live and die by that. And I think that's why I'm saying Jalen's got to pick his spots, right? On a 3rd and 6, on a 4th down, a 4th and 4, or something like that, right? You got to have those plays, right? Because any missed opportunity, any missed, penalty or self-inflicting wounds and stuff like that, or missed throws or just miscommunication, silly stuff like that, you can't afford to have against the Chiefs. And if everything goes right, even still, you're going to be in a close game. So making those plays like he made against the Commanders, right? That touchdown to A.J. Brown, the 4th down conversion on a go route to A.J. Brown again, those sort of moments, I think that's where Jalen needs to really focus in on and make sure he wins each and every time. No turnovers, obviously, unlike last time. And I think that's the way things have to go for Hurts this time around. I don't need him to have a game like last time because obviously it wasn't enough, right? They didn't win. So this time around, just make sure when the moment comes and it's your turn to make a play, make sure to make it, right? Make sure to deliver on it, because there will be a moment in this game where it is required for him to make a crazy throw, right, to extend the play with his legs or get a first down with his legs, score maybe a couple times rushing. He needs to get those plays, right? We can't have a Josh Allen sort of situation where he doesn't get the first down on a QB sneak or a turnover or something like that, right? I think all of that goes into my point of just saying that Jalen doesn't need a big game throughout the entirety, just basically here or there, a sporadic sort of performance. Sounds kind of contradicting, but just staying ready, basically, right? Being locked in and making the plays when you need to. Because it's going to take everybody, and he's a big component of that. So that's where my, ideology lies with Jalen Hurts and what he has to do in this Super Bowl. But, a lot of the pressure and a lot of the blame, most likely, depending on how severe it is, will fall on his shoulders, right? Just based on the position. So just as long as he doesn't make any grave mistake or isn't the sole reason that they lost, I think playing as cleanly as possible, as he has been throughout the entire playoffs, is going to be good enough to get them in a good spot. But we don't know, what those big moments are going to be like, obviously, right? Until we watch the game. So I'm excited to watch the game. It can't come any sooner. But on the totality of the game now that we've brought it up a little bit, we're going to go into a break real quick. But then when we return, we're going to talk about all the referee talk, all the official talks on the refs favoring the Chiefs, the ref having the script about the Chiefs winning this Super Bowl, so they got to make it happen for them. All those sort of conspiracies that have really taken over a large part of the coverage. We're going to be discussing the NFL Referee Association also responded to it, so we're going to get into that when we return after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We're back now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast here again on Wednesday, February 5th. The big game is approaching, and yesterday we talked about storylines, and we mentioned a good bit of them, right? But we failed to mention all of this talk about the referees, right? Allegedly favoring the Kansas City Chiefs, not just in the playoffs, but it seems like all season, right? Based on what everybody's saying and the way everyone's painting it out to be, right? It's been an ongoing thing this season, especially because a couple reasons, right? The Chiefs have won a lot of close games recently. The incident in the Houston game as one of them, and back in December, if you want to go all the way back, right? Now that I'm thinking about it, back in 2013, in around December of 2013, the Bills played the Kansas City Chiefs back then, and if you guys can remember to that very specific date, the Bills played the Chiefs, right, and it was a very close game over there in Arrowhead, and you had that one play where Patrick threw the ball to Travis Kelce there near the end of the game, and he lateraled it to Kadarius Toney, and I think he ended up scoring, right, which would have been a huge, event in that game. But afterwards, the referees called Kadarius Toney for offsides, and it was a whole big deal. The Chiefs were freaking out, Andy Reid was freaking out. Patrick had a very uncharacteristic reaction to it as well. You heard him after the game go up to Josh Allen and say, I think like something along the lines of like good game, but like that call was like BS or something like that, right? He was very upset by it, and he made that like the Chiefs overall made a big deal about it, but when you look back on it, it was the right call, right? He was offsides, pretty obviously at that too. So I think that moment kind of started everything, because from that moment on, it felt like the Chiefs, made a big deal about it, and it feels like since that moment, especially, the calls have been pretty egregious in their favor, right? Because, they made a big stink out of it the first time. Now, every time that it happens, right, the refs try to avoid it, that sort of thing, right? Even this year against the Bengals, people won't like the fact that, that game was decided by a penalty that got the Chiefs in field goal range and stuff like that. So that is, some of the examples that I've just pulled right here for this segment. So, with that example of 2013 back in December, you're not really helping yourself when you react like that to what ultimately ended up being the right call. And then since then, stuff, if there was ever a moment for things to go potentially the Chiefs' way, or if there was ever a 50-50 call that, ended up going in their favor, everyone's just going to go directly to, oh, like the refs are helping the Chiefs, like the Chiefs made a big deal about it last time against the Bills, and now, the refs are all on their side and stuff like that. They're favoring Patrick Mahomes because he's the face of the league and things like that. So it's gotten to a point where, the players are being asked about it now at Media Week. Roger Goodell was asked about it and stuff like that. And it's made it all the way to this week, and all the way for the NFL Referee Association, the NFLRA, to, have a statement about all the conspiracies that they're hearing and kind of stand up for themselves a little bit, right? Because the executive director, Scott Green, had this to say about all these conspiracy theories recently during Super Bowl Media Week. This is what he said. Pretty simple. He said, "It is insulting and preposterous to hear conspiracy theories that somehow 17 officiating crews consisting of 138 officials are colluding to assist one team." And Roger Goodell also disregarded these conspiracy theories. He said that it was ridiculous if anybody thought that, like the refs are seriously trying to help the Chiefs out. And he said that, but he also did say that there's room for improvement, obviously, right? Like, there is the human error aspect of it, right? And that makes sense. And what Roger Goodell said also, as a whole makes sense, right? That it is pretty ridiculous, but he can't hide the fact that, it's not perfect by any means, right? There's a lot of things that maybe can be corrected that officials miss, obviously, but that's part of the job, right? So I thought Roger Goodell was spot on with that. And to me, it's just a little bit kind of like funny. It's comical that some people actually believe that it's as egregious as Scott Green sort of described there in his statement. While I don't think it's true, I don't think it's that, blatant that the refs are helping the Chiefs and anything like that. But I do believe they do usually defer to quarterbacks, especially, or offense over defense is another thing. And more often than not, if it's anywhere close, if it does come down to the official, I do believe that they do side with a guy like Patrick, or like a guy like Josh, or a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, maybe like a head coach like Andy Reid, stuff like that, right? The benefit, the tie goes to the receiver, the tie goes to the offense and things like that, right? And I mean, in some aspect too, I mean, I don't think it's, I want to phrase this right, because I don't think it's fair, like in the Houston game, right? That one was the most obvious one, I feel like, where, Patrick's kind of tugging the line of, sliding, not sliding, going down late. The defender goes to tackle him, barely touches him, and then he gets called for unnecessary roughness, but Patrick sort of instigated it, right? And I have no problem with someone bending the rules, taking advantage of them. I think that's all part of the game, part of the gamesmanship, right? But also, when you understand that as an official, and you see and understand that part of the game where players are going to try to bend the rules like that, I think you have to acknowledge that and kind of tug that line as well. Know that Patrick's going to be, kind of 50-50ing it and then going down late. And if a defender happens to kind of hit him low or happens to make some late contact, as long as it's not obvious, like Al-Shair hit Trevor Lawrence or something like that, right? Then you also have to kind of have that thought in your head, like, Patrick is kind of tugging the line there. This defender is also kind of trying to waive his options. So we got to kind of take it with a grain of salt there and think that both of these players, Patrick, we got to try and protect them, obviously, but, there is that aspect of trying to fool the ref a little bit, right? Trying to get him to see something that maybe, puts him in a precarious situation where he has to make a decision. And I just feel like the refs sometimes don't take that into account, and they might see, Patrick look like he's going down late or not, and if he gets hit a little bit around the head area, they're going to call it anyway. And that might be more so on how the rules are laid out, which is just a much more expansive conversation that we could have on another day. But, it's things like that where I feel like it does favor the offense a little bit more, and I don't think it's anything like too ridiculous like that, like they're just gonna force the Chiefs to win. And I think it's like that in a lot of, maybe not in a lot of sports, but in some of the sports you see, usually like the smaller clubs, the smaller market teams, some of these smaller teams might not receive the benefit of a New York team or a bigger market team or a Kansas City Chiefs team or a team with Tom Brady on it, or a team with, I don't know, like Messi on it, or Real Madrid on it. Those bigger clubs, I feel like that sort of thing, the refs favor, the refs, idea of, helping one team win or one player win over the other team. I think that's also just something that isn't too foreign to some of the sports, especially with some of the big recognizable names and stuff like that. Everybody thinks LeBron gets all the calls, right? It's just a thing that happens, and it might be true, but it comes with, those big name players or big name clubs and things like that, right? And, that's also another part of it. And also, I don't think this is a huge problem that the NFL has to look into or anything like that how some people might suggest, right? Because I don't think the NFL is nearly as bad as like soccer or anything like that, because that one seems to be the most over-exaggerated. There's a lot of flopping and benefit of the doubt going to some of the bigger clubs, some of the bigger teams and players, right? It feels like that's a little bit ridiculous. I don't think the NFL is to that level whatsoever, but also I feel like people are just hating. People are just hating on a dominant dynasty sort of level team, right? And a lot of people just don't want to see the Chiefs win, right? They don't want to see them get any sort of benefit when they're close to losing and then a call goes their way. It's instantly on the refs, right? And it feels like their judgment gets a little bit clouded. And I just feel like some people are hating on the Chiefs, which is understandable, right? I feel like people are sick of them. And, Patrick and some of the other Chiefs players have been asked about being the villain, and that comes with it, right? When you're this good, when you're this dominant for a long period of time, people get sick of you and people just want to, just kind of move on from you, right? But if you keep getting your way and you keep coming out on top, people don't like that. So I think that's also a product of what we're seeing with the ref talk and everything like that, especially when they're on the brink of making history, three-peating and things like that. Nobody wants to see that. And nobody wants to see Patrick celebrating. Nobody wants to see Travis and Taylor on the field. This is not how I feel. I don't really mind. But some people are like that, and that's kind of where this also falls, right? They need to find something that they could blame it on, and the refs usually end up paying that price. So it's an awful job. I can't imagine being a referee. But that's also there's different parts of it that kind of lead us to where we are now. I do think it's a little bit ridiculous. The Chiefs are just a good team, and until somebody finds a way to beat them and plays a near perfect game, these excuses, these conspiracies keep coming out. So it's part of it. It's to be expected, and the Chiefs know that, and I think most people know that around the NFL. And if you are hating a little bit, then it is what it is, I guess, at that point. But it just doesn't take away from the fact that it just comes with the Chiefs being a pretty dominant team that rubs people the wrong way a little bit. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I don't think it's anything so like serious like some people make it out to be, but it is a little entertaining sometimes, especially seeing some of the memes and things like that. It's pretty funny. So that's where, my stance is on it on that. And with that, we're going to move on to another topic that I recently saw regarding Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins kind of gave an explanation, I guess I would say, on the drop-off that we saw this past season from him. At least it's what it appeared like when he went on Good Morning Football and described some of the injuries that he was going through this past season that could have led to that sudden drop-off after Week 10. So we're going to go into what he said and what really he was dealing with and just his overall future, right, going into 2025. Where does that stand? We're going to answer that question when we return in just a few seconds.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alright guys, so it's been some time now. If you guys can go back with me a little bit, and if you recall, it was some time ago when we saw that report from ESPN. I don't know if it was exactly during the season. It might have been when the Falcons made the quarterback change and things like that, or if it was just after the season ended, the regular season ended. I can't quite remember, but regardless of when it was, there was that report from ESPN that the Falcons were likely to move on from Kirk Cousins in March after, a combination of his disappointing play towards the end of the year and Atlanta starting Michael Penix and, sort of favoring him after he impressed them, had some big games against the Commanders was a big performance, and, the Giants was a good game as well. But for the time being, and Michael Penix, performing very well in those games, right, that was enough for the Falcons to kind of go with him going forward, and according to the report from ESPN, led them to a place where it looked like they were just going to move on from Kirk Cousins next month now, right, in March. So, although Kirk Cousins appeared on Good Morning Football, like I mentioned before, we went into break on Tuesday, and he revealed a potential reason why, his play seemed to have this sudden drop-off, right, after playing the first season in a pretty, above average way, pretty above average performance, the way that he came off of that Achilles injury and displayed everything that you would have hoped for in a quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons in his first part of the season, and then to drop off like he did in the second half was pretty like mind-boggling. Like, how did that even happen, right? Just suddenly, like from one week to another, it just happened like that. And Kirk Cousins kind of shed some light on it in that interview on Good Morning Football. He said, against the Saints, which was in Week 10, I got hit pretty good in my right shoulder and elbow, and from there, kind of dealing with that was something I was working through and just never really could get it to where I wanted it. And, pretty simple as that. It was an injury, a couple injuries, I guess, to his shoulder and elbow of his throwing hand that, had been ailing him for, pretty much the second half of the season. And I don't really recall, there ever being, news about him dealing with a shoulder and an elbow injury. It was just kind of like nobody knew an answer. That's why the performance and drop-off in performance was so egregious, was so just unimaginable, right? Because he was playing like pretty decent, and then just from that game against the Saints, which they lost, to then go to games like Denver where they get blown out 38-6, 17-13 against the Chargers where he throws I think 4 interceptions, 42-21 against the Vikings, and then 15-9 victory over the Raiders, but very unimpressive as well. And you're thinking throughout this entire time, like what's going on? Like, why is Kirk playing like this all of a sudden? At least I was. The Saints loss was pretty bad, but I'm thinking like the Saints got, woke up on the right side of the bed that day. They just got one up on a division rival, right? It's kind of like the Browns beating the Steelers in that snow in Cleveland. There's games like that, right? Certain games just happen like that. So that's what I thought. But then to have those chain of events kind of play out like they did against Denver, against the Chargers, Minnesota, and then the Raiders, it became too much of a trend where I'm like this is very weird. Like, why is Kirk playing this bad? But he said that regardless of, the injuries and things like that he still feels that he has a lot of good football left to go, and that this offseason will give his ankle, shoulder, elbow time they need to eventually heal and get back to playing some good football. And, with that information now, right, we get to this idea, this pretty general idea of like what the future looks like for Kirk Cousins, right? In one part, you can't really ignore how well I think Kirk played. I would say in the first half, right, like against the Chiefs, playing them close, beating the Eagles on the road, right? That last drive was phenomenal, right, to start the year. Beating the Bucs in a very high-scoring game on Thursday Night Football, that was very impressive, right? And there was a bunch of other performances in there as well where I don't think you could just ignore it and just kind of pretend it didn't happen, because coming off of an Achilles injury, like right there in the season to start it, right? Still fresh of that injury, it was very doubtful that you thought he could just walk in and look like the old Kirk Cousins. There was a lot of doubts around that. But for him to kind of get over that loss to the Steelers and next week play the Eagles and defeat them on the road and then just kind of get on this run where they were leading the NFC South, I think you just can't ignore that, right? I don't think that's really fair. But, his time in Atlanta as quarterback one, over Michael Penix seems to be gone now. I don't think that if he does end up staying, that's really going to be like an open competition or anything like that. I think now the Falcons have pretty much set it in stone that, Michael's our guy. We're going to go with him going forward and just work on developing him. There's no need to go back to Kirk Cousins. So, credit to Michael Penix Jr. for taking advantage of that opportunity. And you also, can't ignore someone out there taking the chance on Kirk again. If this was to, come into fruition and they were maybe to release him, which would cost them a lot of money, the Falcons, or trade him, I can't summarily just dismiss and say, no one's going to trade for him. Like, there's no way. No one's going to want Kirk Cousins, right? He just played awful, and he's being paid a lot of money, and nobody's going to want him, right? I can't 100% say that's true, because in the NFL, as we've seen, all it takes is one general manager, one desperate team, one team that doesn't have a spot in the draft where they could draft a quarterback, for them to look at Kirk Cousins, look at that first half of the season and think, all right, like, that was pretty well. Like, we could definitely use that, and that could be of service of us in 2025 at least. There's going to be a team out there that thinks like that, right? So, it's pretty possible, and I think that's still a pretty likely opportunity for him, but I don't think it'll be a trade or anything like that. I think that's where you kind of get into that mindset of hesitation, I would say, with Kirk Cousins, because I think it'd be more likely that the Falcons kind of cut him, and teams should have worked with him directly on trying to accommodate that contract, because that contract's not inviting anybody in to try and sign him or trade for him, right? No one's going to run to the Falcons and look at that contract and say, like, we want that, right? That's also another thing that they got to get over and another thing that they got to work through. So, either Kirk is going to stay because nobody really wants to take a chance on him on the Falcons, and they're going to have one of the most expensive backups in the NFL, or someone does take him on, and, if it's a cut, the Falcons are going to have to pay a lot of money, or I'm sure if it's a trade, I'm sure there's going to be some compensation coming from the Falcons towards that contract as well. So they're not completely out of the woods on that as well. But I believe it's still like a decent sized risk for any team that wants to bring Kirk Cousins in as a starter. I think that's a pretty decently sized risk for teams like the Raiders, the Giants, the Jets, or the Cleveland Browns. I think if you want to bring him in as your starting quarterback with that idea in mind, I think that's pretty risky to do, especially for those teams, that I just mentioned, that don't really have like a lot of room to make a mistake like that, especially as big as the quarterback position is. So, I feel like Kirk right now, even if he doesn't look at himself like it, I feel like now he's more like just a very good bridge quarterback, right? With the contract and everything like that, and still the Achilles injury might be a little weary for some people. And also, when he says like the offseason is going to be great for his ankle, for his shoulder, for his elbow, two of them on his throwing arm, right? It doesn't make it any more appealing for any team to think, I'm going to go and get Kirk Cousins while he's kind of like working with all these different injuries, right? That's also something that teams don't really want to work with also, unfortunately, right? So, that's also another thing that people got to work through. And if one team or one general manager really gets through all of that, then I think Kirk can really give you the chance to have a very good bridge quarterback, a very good temporary guy where you have a young quarterback potentially there. Ideally for me, a team like the Raiders or the Giants get their rookie quarterback and they have Kirk Cousins in there as that bridge guy. I think that's, to me, where I envision Kirk Cousins now, where he is in his career with the injuries and, how just things have played out for him to this point. Who wants to have that expensive of an emergency quarterback also, right? If you want to play devil's advocate, right? To have an emergency quarterback cost you that much money, is that something that you really want to have? That's a valid question also. But it's a very touchy situation, I think, right? We're going to have to play out the market and kind of feel out what the vibes are during free agency and, after June and during the draft as well, right? Those are usually the dates and times roughly where you can kind of get a better idea of it. But I think generally with Kirk, I'm at a spot right now where I don't think he can be a starting quarterback that you solely depend on, right? You got to have something in your locker in case things don't go the way you intend, because he costs so much and because of last season as well. So that's where I think Kirk is in my mind. Some people might think highly or higher of him, but to me, I just feel like I'm a bit more hesitant. I'm a bit more on the hesitant side of it. So let me know what you guys think. Where do you think Kirk will land? And do you still think of him as a starting quarterback? Leave your guys' thoughts in the comments section below. But we're going to move on to another quick break here. And when we return, we're going to continue our series of looking at spots for improvement for all NFL teams during this offseason. And now we're going to make a stop at one of our favorite spots in Dallas, Texas, where we're going to look at the Cowboys and look at 3 positions where I think that they need to improve on in 2025.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
quickly jumping back in here into the action once again with the ongoing series that we've been, kind of starting and going through really the last couple days, just already getting a jump start on the offseason already. And now shifting over from the NFC North and going over to the NFC East and starting to talk about the 4 teams in this division, we're starting with the Dallas Cowboys and their offseason needs in 2025, right? Under new head coach Brian Schottenheimer, he's got a lot of work to do, right? With his new role. And I think the best thing about this move that I will admit that's actually accurate is that because he's been here, because he's been part of this offense that struggled last year and he's seen all the injuries and things like that, I think the best part about promoting Brian Schottenheimer is his familiarity with all of that, right? He knows exactly what needs to be fixed, and he knows exactly what this team's biggest, flaws are and where they could get better. So I think that's kind of where, in just this sole situation, this very specific context, that promoting Brian Schottenheimer looks like a very logical move. But that's the only spot. But yeah, I mean, talking about this team that missed the playoffs this year, that was 7-10. They had a lot of injuries. They paid Dak a lot of money, which, we're not going to get into that. I think Dak deserves his money, just based on the market, right? You can't control that. But regardless of that, Dak got hurt this year. CeeDee was dealing with injuries. Micah got hurt. So it was a very, very disappointing and just very tough season overall for everybody there. And regardless of that now, trying to forget about that, right, you still have those players, right? You lock down CeeDee, you lock down Dak, and you're hoping to lock down Micah Parsons. But, those are only the cornerstones of this organization, right? They need to find the other guys, right? The supporting cast, and trying to build this thing up as quickly as possible. And I think the 3 main spots to look at could be wide receiver, running back, and defensive line especially. And starting off with wide receiver, I just think CeeDee Lamb needs some help, right? Jamar Chase is phenomenal. Justin Jefferson is amazing. I'm trying to think of anybody else that fits into that category with those guys. I can't really think of anybody else. But, those 3 guys are the ones that jump to my mind straight away. And even they have Jordan Addisons, right? They have TJ Hawkinsons. They have Taylor Nailers, they have T. Higgins, they have, all these supporting pieces, Mike Gesicki, right? And in Dallas, I mean, not to discredit Jalen Tolbert or not Dalton Schultz, I can't even remember his name. Jake Ferguson, right? Not to discredit those guys completely, but I feel like CeeDee, with how good he is, and we know that he's good for 1,200 yards and double-digit touchdowns, healthy each and every season, right? Those are, close to his ceiling limits. That's still not enough to help you in this day and age with offenses, kind of running the show and having all this talent, all this modernization of these offenses, right? You're going to need more than just CeeDee Lamb trying to take over a game. So not only CeeDee, but Dak too. You just paid him a bunch of money. You got to help him out too, give him some options so he's not holding on to the ball so long, getting hit, dealing with another injury, or, causing pointless turnovers and things like that by just holding on to the ball too long or forcing it into some tight window throws. You can't have that, right? We kind of dealt with that this season. So trying to upgrade that position, I think, is going to be something of interest for them. And, we just got the news about Cooper Kupp, and, could that be an option? Probably not. I just got to mention it because obviously it's some of the biggest news, but I don't think they need to add someone making $20 million over the next 2 years to this team. They don't need that problem, honestly. So it's a good idea in just the surface of it, but adding that contract, I don't think makes too much sense for them. So you look at other guys in free agency like a Chris Godwin potentially. I'm not even going to mention T. Higgins because, again, he's too expensive. Amari Cooper, a reunion there, I don't think it's the worst idea. Stephon Diggs also, but he's coming off of an injury, so do you really want to bring someone in like that. He's a great receiver, but, that might be a little bit too risky for some people, right? Those are the options in free agency, but, you also still have the draft where I think it's a very deep class in terms of wide receivers that I just feel like a lot of people don't know of, right? You have your Abukas, you have your Luther Burdens, you have the receiver from Arizona that I can't pronounce his name. Sorry about that, but you have those guys, but I think that's still even a little bit too rich at number 12. With how deep I think the class is, I think you could wait until the second round to get a guy. So you don't necessarily need to spend number 12 on a wide receiver. So if they could go out and get even like Amari Cooper or Stephon Diggs, I think that would be very good for them. Just to bring in an experienced guy that knows what he's doing, is a great professional, and can help him out right away, right? And then you could still, develop guys like Jalen Tolbert and things like that. But I think they definitely need to add to that group, because Brandon Cooks also wasn't too involved this year, and that's only one of the spots. So then you look again on the offense, and you look at running back with Rico Dowdle. He did record over 1,000 yards this year, but he is a free agent. So you can bring back Rico Dowdle. I wouldn't really have a problem with that, but I think you not only need to bring him back, that's fine, but you need to add somebody else on top of that as well. I think you need to just roll with two guys that are like two B+ guys, right? At least in some people's minds, right? I think Rico Dowdle can be a very solid running back, but I think to most, maybe he's not. I don't think he'll be like Derrick Henry, right? Or obviously like a Joe Mixon or Saquon, obviously. So if you're going to have Rico, I still think it would help for this offense. If you don't really have too many options at wide receiver, get another running back in there, right? Because this market this year is not too much filled with running backs like last year, like Josh Jacobs and Derrick and Saquon, right? You don't really have that this year. So this year you can have guys on cheaper deals, maybe like an Aaron Jones. I think that would be an interesting fit there for him to complement Rico Dowdle. Wouldn't be such a bad idea. A guy like J.K. Dobbins, another guy that's probably on the cheaper side as well. Najee Harris is another one too. Like, you can add one of these three guys, and I think that would have you in a better situation than just rocking with Rico Dowdle, right? I think he can give you 1,000, like that's solid, but I think that's a stat where it doesn't show too much value. It doesn't really. I feel like rushing for 1,000 yards isn't so impressive anymore, because Najee's done it for like every year he's been in the NFL, but nobody talks about him like a top 5 running back, right? So I think that's a stat where people aren't just too impressed by it, and I think with Rico, I think wouldn't hurt them to add a guy like Aaron Jones or J.K. or Najee Harris in free agency, or even in all the mock drafts I've seen, Ashton Genty's been the pick at number 12, and I don't hate it, again, like the wide receivers, but, this is a very deep running back class, so I don't necessarily see the urgency to draft Ashton Genty that high. I know he's had a historical, once-in-a-generation type of career at Boise State, but I don't know. It feels like there's a lot of options at running back this year. A lot that, a lot of people just don't know about that could do an okay to pretty good job for you at the NFL. I don't think you need a running back at number 12. But, again, I wouldn't hate it in that same breath. But I would opt to go with a guy later in the draft. That's just me. And then, lastly, the defensive line. It was awful this year, right? The run defense was very it was to a level where I've really never seen it to, especially the beginning part of it, where it was that was all everybody talked about, right? The run defense was just non-existent, right? And, it led to some pretty big defeats early on, right? To the Saints, and the Ravens was also another one. So they got to fix that up. One of the main priorities that they should focus on, though, this offseason is re-signing a guy like Osa Odigizua, right, their defensive tackle. I've linked him to every team I think I've talked about so far in this series, right, because he's that good of a player, and the Cowboys should try everything to keep him in their building, because if he goes to anywhere like the Commanders or the Lions or, I don't know, who else did I mention, like the Chicago Bears and someone like that, right, they're going to love to have him there. So the Cowboys can't really afford to let him go and just let him leave like that. Then you also have DeMarcus Lawrence, who's a free agent, but I don't think if we're to pick between Odigizua and DeMarcus Lawrence, I'm gonna go with Osa. That's just me, because you can get guys still, like we've mentioned before, like Hassan Reddick, Josh Sweat, Khalil Mack, Poona Ford, potentially in free agency. I think you could make do without DeMarcus Lawrence, but I'm sure that they're going to try and re-sign him or at least throw him an offer, but I wouldn't be too upset if they lost him but kept Odigizua in the middle of their defense. And, talking about some of these names in the draft also could be something that they explore if they see a fit or if they see someone drop that's supposed to go early on. I don't hate that also in the draft, but it's going to take a couple of these guys, right? Because the way that everybody talked about the run defense and just based on what we saw as well, right? You're not just going to sign back Odigizua and bring in one guy like Hassan Reddick or something and just think that that's fine. They're going to need a couple of guys on this defensive line, a lot of bodies to throw in there for depth and just an improvement of quality that they need on that defensive line. It's not just going to be one. So, they do have good players on this defense. Like Overshone was a great find, someone that I really didn't know going into this season, and then each and every week he was standing out. So that's awesome for them to have. Micah obviously goes without saying. Trayvon Diggs, Deron Bland. They just need to lock up and shore up that defensive line a little bit more, because they have some playmakers. They have been known to make pretty big game-altering plays, and they just couldn't really do that this year because they didn't get the opportunity because everyone was just running the ball right at them, like right down their face. So fixing that, I think, would allow them to get back to playing a style of defense that they're very comfortable in. So wide receiver, defensive line, and running back, to me, are the three places where they need to start, and hopefully, unlike last offseason, we can actually see them try and do something a bit more aggressive and not wait till the last minute. But that might be a little bit too hopeful, knowing the Cowboys. So we'll see. I mean, we got one more segment to get to on today's show. Going back to Media Week this week at the Super Bowl, Roger Goodell, we're going to react to some of the comments he made on the NFL expanding internationally and how that could lead to an expanded regular season, a international franchise potentially, and even an international Super Bowl at some point in the future. Roger Goodell mentioned all of that, and we're going to react to it when we return right after this. Thank you guys for joining me back here on today's show. And in this last segment, I wanted to just bring up something that's been one of the more popular things I think we've talked about on this show. And it is this progression of the NFL's quest to expand their brand internationally. I think it's pretty fascinating because it comes along with a pretty big ripple effect, right? It's not just the idea of the NFL wants to be known a lot more, globally, internationally at different countries, right? That's why they're playing so many games out of the country. But I think with that, comes a lot of things like a lot of things we're going to mention on here. I don't want to give it away just at the start, but it starts with NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, right? He spoke on Monday about the NFL's constant effort to push the boundaries, right, internationally, with the ultimate goal of someday having 16 international games, right? If this season felt like they played a lot of international games, they only played 5 this season. So think about a regular season when there's 16 international games being played. It'll feel surreal to ever have that, but that's the ultimate goal that Roger Goodell said on Monday that he wants to reach, also mentioning that back in October. So the short-term goal with the NFL, though, just talking about 2025, is to go from the 5 games we had last season to a total of 8 this upcoming season, right? If you look back on this regular season, we had the game down in Sao Paulo, Brazil, we had 3 in England, and we had 1 in Munich, Germany, once again this year. So that felt like a good amount, right? But the NFL is going to continue to do more to expand the NFL name basically around the world. And with the success in Sao Paulo this year, right, and the games being held in places like Mexico already, and the NFL trying to grow even more, we've already heard news this year that there's going to be a game in Berlin, Germany for the first time this year. There's going to be a game in Madrid, Spain as well for the first time ever. And according to sources, there will be a game in Ireland that will be played this year, and that it should be announced relatively soon, with the Steelers being one of the teams linked to playing in Ireland. So there's that's going to happen in 2025. And we also mentioned that the NFL will be playing in Australia, allegedly, according to some reports, but that's not till 2026. But you can see how quickly this is moving, right? Each and every year, it feels like we're going to Spain, we're going to Germany, we might be going to Ireland, Australia, maybe like somewhere like France or something like that, right? Each and every year, it feels like it's growing more and more, right? It's expanding to at least one more different country each and every year, right? And Roger Goodell didn't only stop there, right? He didn't only stop at just playing games at different countries. That wasn't good enough for him. He said that this growth could eventually lead to there being an international franchise at some point in the NFL, right? Joining from, a different country, right? Obviously having a franchise outside the United States, and maybe also, a Super Bowl, right? Outside the United States as well, which seems almost impossible, right, for that to ever happen. But Roger Goodell specifically said back on Monday that he said, I do think that there's potential someday where we're going to have an international franchise, and if we do, I think it would not surprise me at all if a Super Bowl follows and is played there. But he did say it would require expanding the regular season from 17 games to 18 games, right, to have expansion of the regular season. And then, from that expansion, if that ever does happen, you're probably going to get an international franchise, I would imagine. And then a long time down the road, we're going to get maybe an international Super Bowl. But again, that's probably not going to be for a very long time. And I say that because it's interesting to see that they're already talking, or at least thinking about the idea to have an international Super Bowl, where that seemed impossible like 5 years ago, barely 5 years ago in 2020, right? But the negotiations with the NFLPA will be, the discussions with the Player Association are going to be the farthest thing from easy when they discuss, expanding the regular season. Because I want to find what I saw today on that topic, because I was going to bring it up today, and then I saw some news about the NFLPA and this idea of expanding the regular season. Here it is. ESPN, I got a notification from them around 3 p.m. Eastern time today that The players' union says no one among membership wants a longer schedule, questioning Roger Goodell's statements on safety data. So the NFLPA does not want an 18-game regular season whatsoever at this point in time, but that's not going to stop guys like Roger Goodell and the NFL wanting to expand it even more. But like I said, that is going to be, think about the hardest thing you've probably ever had to argue or convince someone of, and probably double it by like 3. When you're talking about so many members of the NFLPA, when you're talking about so many factors and intangibles that it would require to not only expand the season, but for everybody to be somewhere near a common resolution, for everybody to be near the same page, is going to be such a monster task that I can't even imagine how long or what those discussions will even be like. But that's where the NFL wants to get to someday, and I'm pretty sure their current CBA, they're going to have to redo that entire thing, right, if they were ever going to expand the regular season. And I don't know, I think it expires in between like 2028 and 2030, I believe, is when they'd have to renegotiate a brand new CBA. But if they were to expand it in the recent, upcoming future, then they're going to have to bring those discussions up a lot earlier. And I'm sure, like we just heard, the NFLPA is not really going to be for that. And it feels like nobody's really eager to expand the regular season even more, right? Unless, you start talking finances with people, right? And that's also what the NFL has been very stubborn with. It's not a 50-50 split like I believe the NBA is. The NFL and the owners like to have a majority of the say and a majority of the power in that respect, right? But if they want to have the 18-game season, right, then they're going to have to kind of fork over some of their preferences, like that 50-50 split that seems impossible, but something's going to have to give in those negotiations, and we're just kind of, barely touching the surface of everything like that, right? There's a lot more factors that have to go into it, but I mean, that is, to me, the biggest thing standing in the way of everything like that, right? So, I'd say the most logical space, if we're really going to go down this avenue here a little bit, where there could be like an international franchise, if you want to speculate about it, I feel like the most, sensical spot would be somewhere like, Canada, right? Or like Mexico, or even England, right? I think for logistics and the time difference and stuff like that, right? And, every season there's a game in England. So I feel like that one would be pretty easy to kind of pick out. Or Canada, right? Like the NBA has the Toronto Raptors or something like that, or even Mexico, right? Because they have a pretty loyal fan base in Mexico also. So I think those places would be the most logical, spots where I think that there would be an international franchise. But not only like one international franchise, but I think wouldn't it have to be at least 2, right? To at least have one in the NFC and the AFC. You can't just have one, right? That doesn't really make too much sense. So you would have to add 2 more, right? I think that's pretty sensible, right? Just adding 2 instead of 1. Wouldn't that make more sense? And if that does make more sense, right, that would require a lot more work, right? So I don't know. I mean, this is still very, very young, still very, very, very green in terms of where they are in making this a reality. But, it's going to be a hard sell to the NFLPA of trying to expand the regular season just because you want more international games. I can't imagine too many people will be so thrilled that half of the league is going to give up one more home game, or I'll say it like this, like have one less home game, right? Because they're going to have to play internationally somewhere. I can't imagine too many people are going to be thrilled about that. And also, for an international franchise, right, I can't imagine it'll be a great selling point if, for college players, right, to be drafted there. Of course, it's a great opportunity to play professional football somewhere, but being in the early stages of something like that, I can't imagine it'll be too easy to convince, like college players to go and play in a different country, right? It feels like that'll be very difficult, and there will be a lot of growing pains with that. But, again, this is still very early on, very early stages of everything like that. But Roger Goodell, at these big meetings, at these big events, like the Super Bowl, like the owners' meeting, and off-season meetings and things like that, big topics like these are discussed. And I think it's interesting to follow along each and every time what kind of, new information we have, right? I think that's pretty cool to keep track of. But, in terms of actions, I think we're still a long way from that. So that's what he had to say on that, the latest update on the international scene around the NFL. So we'll keep track with that as we go along. But for right now, we'll end today's show on that topic on Roger Goodell. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's show of the Chip Shot Football Podcast. And if you want to see more of this show, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe first, and then go on YouTube and check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel, or either the GSMC Sports Network channel, whichever one you're watching this live on, and, follow along. There's a lot more content and a lot more just stuff around this show on there, around the NFL, with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host, covering more stuff leading up into the Super Bowl, more things around the offseason, more just coverage on the NFL each and every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And with that, I will be back again tomorrow, and I hope to see you guys all back here again tomorrow as we get closer and closer to the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit.